Hello and welcome to Music and Art in the Catholic Tradition, Module 2, Lesson Number 1. Today we're going to be talking about Boethius's Principles of Music, how that relates to all the things that we've read so far back in Module 1, and how that relates to what we'll be seeing in the future in the rest of Module 2 and onwards into other modules yet to come in the course. So Boethius's Principles of Music is by far the most common work of music theory and work of musical aesthetics in the Middle Ages. Now there is access to other works in certain areas, certain works of Plato, certain works of Aristotle. In many cases, Aristotle was actually more well-known than Plato, which explains why Aristotle is referred to by many writers as the philosopher, even though in the Renaissance, Plato would become more popular than Aristotle. Boethius lived in the time period right after the fall of the Roman Empire, so we're talking about the late 5th into the early to mid-6th century. And he was lucky enough to have been taught both Latin and Greek, and to have, I believe, also studied in Greece. And so he had access to a lot more of the classical works of literature, to the literature of ancient Greece, than many of even his contemporaries did, and certainly more so than many scholars and thinkers who would come after him all the way to the Renaissance, when there's a rediscovery, a rebirth, that's where we get Renaissance, of classical Greek and Roman thought through the influx of new works in translation and so on and so forth. So we can think of Boethius either as a very late classical writer, or really as one of the first, if not the first, and certainly the first and foremost medieval thinker on music in the Western world. Now, one of the beautiful things about his Principles of Music is that in a very Aristotelian way, Boethius leaves no stone unturned, and he seeks to discuss every single facet of music that he could possibly talk about, even going so far in the later books of the work to talk about the mathematical ratios that make up pitches and the relationships between pitches, and it's really quite fascinating, but far, far beyond anything that we would need to do in this class. So for today, we're really just talking about the first 30 pages or so of this translation of Boethius's Principles of Music. And as we have in previous lessons, we're going to talk about very similar things in Boethius's work as we saw in Plato and Aristotle, and also in St. Augustine. And those things are, what is music? What does music do? So what is its power? What is its influence? What is its nature? And what should we do with the knowledge of its nature, of its power? So, diving right in, what is music? Well, Boethius's great claim to fame is that he's the first writer to really classify music. And he does it quite interestingly from our perspective. Now, all the things he's saying, as I mentioned in the lead-in to this video, the write-up to it, that pretty much everything he's saying has a foundation in Aristotle and Plato. But this classification is uniquely his, and it has a profound impact on the way we look at music in the Middle Ages and beyond. So he divides music into 3 types. And he writes, "It seems that one discussing the musical discipline should discuss, to begin with, the kinds of music which we know to be contained in this study. Indeed, there are 3 types of music. The first type is the music of the universe, which he calls musica mundana. The second type, that of the human being, musica humana. And the third type is that which is created by certain instruments, musica instrumentis constituta, such as the kithara or the tibia or other instruments which produce melodies. Now that's a bit weird for us from the modern perspective, because we consider all of music to simply be contained in the third and last type of music that Boethius describes, the musica instrumentis. That is, not just, he says music of instruments, but he also means music produced by the voice. So another way of looking at his classification is musica instrumentis is the music that we hear. Musica humana is the music, the harmony that connects our body to our souls. And musica mundana is the music of the universe, or the harmony with which all the heavenly bodies coexist. So Earth goes around the sun, and so does Mars and all the other planets, and they're all doing it very consistently, very ordered, in a very orderly fashion. They're not bumping into each other. Man, that would be absolutely terrifying, right? To see Mars crash into Mercury or something like that. And he also extends this music of the universe to include the music of matter, the music of the seasons, the music of nature. So all the harmony that the harmonious proportions and the harmonious order that everything around us silently to our ears, but at some higher level, there's a music in that. And rather than being content to simply say that music is melody and rhythm, as others have said before him, he is very careful to point out that music is caused, it is melody and rhythm, but that melody is made up of pitches, and he goes so far as to describe what pitches are. And he's absolutely spot on in terms of physics as to how pitches are produced, through a percussion, through a vibration in the air, and that each pulse creates a different a repercussion in the air, but that because the string vibrates, or the voice vibrates, or the timpani vibrates, or the trumpet vibrates at such a fast interval, at such a high speed, we don't perceive the individual repercussions in the air. It sounds like a single tone. And it's really quite impressive that after the fall of the Roman Empire, when we sort of have this conception of there being nothing there in Western Europe except for a bunch of knights running around killing each other, that simply by observing with his own senses and contemplating logically, Boethius is able to, and of course, yes, he's also looking at Greek treatises, Greek authors who have done something like this before, so he's not pulling all this physics straight out of his own mind. But it's really quite impressive. And so he says that's what music is practically. There's 3 types of music, 2 of which we cannot hear and 1 of which we do hear. And that, of course, goes back to Plato's idea of there being this sort of fundamental resonance among all things, and that the way those resonances interplay amongst each other is how we determine whether things are harmonious with each other, whether things work together, whether things are beautiful, whether things are ordered. So a very violent person is not well ordered with society because their frequency, the music of their soul, is not in tune with the music of a harmonious society or something like that. And he also, just briefly, if you look on page 32, we can say that his idea of beauty is also pretty much identical to that of the ancients, when he says that for the sense of hearing can apprehend sounds in such a way that it not only judges them and recognizes their differences, but it very often takes pleasure in them if they are in the form of sweet and well-ordered modes, whereas it finds displeasure if the sounds heard are unordered and incoherent. So pleasure may not be the same as beauty. Aquinas, as we'll see, would probably not agree that pleasure is the same as beauty. But pleasure is contingent on order for Boethius, which of course is a similar belief. A true pleasure in something, as Plato would say. And if we turn to the power of music, what does music do to us? Or what is its character, its nature? Boethius writes, "For there is no greater path whereby instruction comes to the mind than through the ear. Therefore, when rhythms and modes enter the mind by this path, there can be no doubt that they affect and remold the mind into their own character." So, he's building this off the idea that things that are similar are pleasing, and things that are not similar are displeasing. And so, when the music enters our body, we are displeased by a discord between the two, if it's different from our own character, and we seek to come into consonant harmony with it. And to do that, we end up changing ourselves to accommodate the music. And so the result is, he writes, "Thus Plato held that we should be extremely cautious in this matter, lest some change in music of good moral character should occur. He also said that there is no greater ruin for the morals of a community than the gradual perversion of a prudent and modest music. For the minds of those hearing the perverted music immediately submit to it, little by little departing from their character, and retain no vestige of justice or honesty." So again, with Boethius, we see that he's really just repeating what Plato has already said. And he also goes on to say, "Moreover, it should be especially remembered that if some melody or mode is altered in some way, even if this alteration is only the slightest change, the fresh change will not be immediately noticed, but after some time it will cause a great difference, and will sink down through the ears into the soul itself. Thus Plato held that the state ought to see that only music of the highest moral character and prudency be composed, and that it should be modest, simple, and masculine, rather than effeminate, violent, or fickle." And so that's what we should do because of the power of music. The power of music is incredible, and it can profoundly affect us for good or for bad. And it can do so without us even realizing that it's doing it. And so we have to be very cautious not to allow good music that has proved to be good, to be corrupted by the addition of things which will turn it into lascivious or otherwise bad music. And this is, of course, Plato's argument. Plato is the one who says we need to regulate, whereas Aristotle says we can allow more freedom. Every type of mode has its own place in Aristotle, whereas in Plato some should just never be used. So Boethius comes down on the side of Plato, and the result of that is that many medieval thinkers, for example, at Oxford, during the Middle Ages, of course it's not until around the 11th century that Oxford is founded, but to get a master's degree in, a liberal arts master's degree, all the master's degrees were simply just MAs, basically in liberal arts. There wasn't specialization back then. But to get a master's degree, you had to have read Boethius's Principles of Music and lectured on them. So it was a very widely known work, not just for musicians, but also for thinkers. It was part of your well-rounded education as a man of learning. We'll see that there's this anxiety over change in the Catholic tradition, change to the musical tradition. That which has been around the longest has proved itself to be good, and that which is a new recent change is dangerous. It proves itself to be unknown, and the dangers of it cannot be fully known because, as Boethius says, the music seeps in little by little and we can't even realize the change. And so, at the end of this module, we will see no less than Pope John the 22nd issuing a bull condemning new music and demanding that it be well ordered and well regulated. And interestingly enough, the musicians totally ignored him. As far as we know, the music that we have didn't really change after that. In fact, it continued getting more and more disordered, as he would say. So that's something that we're going to really talk about in this module, in the discussion forum. Now, I know it might seem boring at this point that we really are seeing just the same thing come up over and over again. You know, what is music? What is its power? What should we do about it? But that's still a very telling thing, right? The fact that there's such a consistency in the belief of what music is and what it does and what we should do about it, that we might not be surprised if we still have these same thoughts in our own present day about music. But in any case, that's lesson 1 of module 2. I hope you enjoyed module 1, and I hope you will continue to enjoy module 2. I look forward to discussing not just Boethius, but also the works of music and art with you in the discussion forum, and also giving you a number of lessons dedicated to them as well. In the beginning of the semester, we will spend more time talking about the texts, just because it's a lot more accessible for all of us to do together, depending on our backgrounds. But I will be incorporating the art more and more as we go throughout, and we get into especially the Renaissance, and then we'll have so many works to talk about, and then we won't even scratch 0.001% of them. And I will see you next time.